Ukraine is in a stronger position than a year ago. Almost everyone was saying this a year ago. Ukraine is barely holding on, running out of ammunition, and the West is getting tired. Today, there is a summit in Ankara, and that same Ukraine is not asking for salvation, but for patriots, which it will produce itself. What happened in the last 12 months that turned this picture upside down? Let's figure it out together, and the version they won't show you for 3 reasons will be at the end of this video. On July 7th and 8th, a NATO summit was held in Ankara. According to Bloomberg, Zelensky arrived there in a noticeably stronger position than a year ago. This isn't my assessment. It's the agency's analysis based on very specific facts. NATO allocated 70 billion euros in military aid to Ukraine for 2026, with a commitment to maintain at least the same level in 2027. Trump publicly promised to grant Ukraine a license to produce Patriot systems, meaning not just deliveries, but actual production on Ukrainian territory. It will take time, but this is already putting, and will continue to put serious pressure on Russia. At the same time, Russia continues to strike Kyiv. Even during the summit, the military pressure did not stop. But it's against this backdrop that we should analyze why the balance of power has shifted. Today, we will look at 3 reasons for this shift. The first is the Ukrainian campaign, the campaign against oil refining and what it has done to the Russian economy. By campaign, I mean the bombing campaign. The second, the numbers on drone interceptions and what that means for Ukraine in general and for the front line. And the third, why 70 billion euros is not just a nice number on paper. So, reason number 1 strikes on oil refineries and the fuel crisis in Russia. Zelensky in Ankara literally said, "There is not a single major Russian oil refinery left that has not been hit by Ukraine." This is not an exaggeration. According to industry analysts, in June, Russia was processing about 4 million barrels of oil per day, but that's a quarter less than a year ago. And that's the lowest in 2 decades. In other words, in the past 20 years, there hasn't been anything like this. Ukraine managed to take out a quarter of Russia's refining capacity. This is a fantastic military success. The gasoline shortage in Russia has reached about 25,000 tons per day. Fuel rationing has been introduced in more than half of Russia's regions. In Crimea, they've imposed a complete ban on gasoline sales. Portable toilets have been installed at gas stations in Irkutsk, because people were standing in line for hours. And here's what's important. Putin himself publicly acknowledged the problem. For the first time. For the first time since the beginning of the crisis. Before, he pointedly ignored such topics. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War write directly, "This is an attempt by the Kremlin not to appear out of touch with reality ahead of the parliamentary elections." In other words, the problem is so serious that staying silent inside the country is more dangerous than admitting it. Russia's budget deficit for the first 5 months has reached, 6 trillion. 6 trillion rubles. That's 60% more than what was planned for the entire year. And that's just in 5 months. Can you even imagine what's going on there in that regard? Forecasts. People don't feel it yet, right? They'll feel it by the end of the year. The GDP growth forecast for 2026 has been cut from 1.3, which is very little, to 0.4, which is basically nothing. Because this isn't some Ukrainian propaganda line, this is from the Center for European Policy Analysis and the Russian Central Bank's own data. But the fuel crisis is only half the story. The other half is what's happening directly on the front line, and here the numbers are even more interesting. Well, now the second reason is the interception of drones and the frontline position. Zelensky stated in Ankara that Ukraine is currently intercepting over 90 Russian drones. This is true, confirmed by the American Institute for the Study of War. NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte also personally confirmed this and praised Ukraine not as a diplomatic gesture, but as recognition of a specific technical achievement. At the same time, Ukraine showed that it can strike deep into Russia. For example, the drone attack on Omsk. Can you imagine where Omsk is located? It's the largest oil pumping station. The distance is 3,000 kilometers. This is the first strike of its kind during the entire war. We're not talking about a one-time action, but about an established long-range strike system. Russia still has some localized advances in the east, but the balance of power has changed. A year ago, Ukraine was mostly on the defensive and asking for survival. Now it is conducting a systematic campaign of economic exhaustion against the enemy, and at the same time, together with Ukraine, it is defending the sky more effectively than ever before in the war. The only thing they seriously lack is Patriots to shoot down a certain type of Russian missile. That's the third reason. As always, you guessed it, it's money again. 70 billion euros is not a one-time gesture of goodwill. This is a formal commitment by 32 NATO countries set for 2027. At the same time, Ukraine is already working on a separate loan from the European Union. That's different. NATO and the European Union are different. It's for 90 billion euros. Ukraine has already started receiving the first tranches from it. This is already easing the pressure on both the military and civilian budgets. Trump's promise to transfer the license for Patriot production is a fundamentally different kind of relationship than just supplying weapons. A license means Ukraine's long-term integration into the Western defense industry, and not just one-time aid that can be stopped by a political decision of one person or another. Compare this to the tone a year ago when every delivery was discussed as a favor that was still in doubt. The architecture of support for Ukraine has become stronger, and this is a structural, not an emotional shift, which it seems shows that the American position has shifted toward increasing pressure on the Russian side. We don't know what caused this. They won't say this out loud, but you should always look not at the words but at the actions. Trump is selling weapons to Europeans for transfer to Ukraine. He agreed to the production of Patriot systems in Ukraine, and it seems that something else is happening that Russia really doesn't like. I would be very surprised if it isn't happening. Knowing Trump, it is happening. So, 3 pillars, even stronger positions: the economic exhaustion of Russia through strikes on oil refining, technical superiority in drone interception and long-range strike capability, and the institutional consolidation of Western support for years to come, and not just for one budget cycle when we have to worry again. Each of these pillars is a separately verifiable fact, not just a collection of optimistic wishes or desires. A year ago, we were talking about whether Ukraine would survive, and I said it was terrible, all those ups and downs. And over this year, gentlemen, 20,000 every month, multiply that by 12 months, that's 250,000 young Ukrainians. Today, the discussion focuses on what terms this will end on and with what outcome. That's a difference worth noticing for anyone who wants to understand what's happening, not just react to it. I still believe that 250,000 young Ukrainians is too high a price for a piece of land, but again, it's not for me to decide. In any case, as I already said, the situation in Ukraine is changing. That doesn't mean it has changed. It doesn't mean that Ukraine can now drive Russia out. And I just think that something is starting to change in the minds of Russian officials in the Kremlin and around them. Something is starting to change, and this could bring positive shifts. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude. To be continued.